Before I begin, I want to caution that I will be discussing some disturbing things, albeit to a very small degree. That said, if hearing about sexual assault is something that's going to affect you negatively, please skip this video. I don't want anyone hurt because of this. I remember when the first episode of Goblin Slayer came out. It got a ton of attention for a specific scene, featuring a group of newbie adventurers going into a cave to fight some goblins. The anime caught a lot of people by surprise when the malicious creatures turned out to not only be violent and vicious, but also rapist. The sight of the goblins raping one of the female adventurers pissed a lot of people off, and I can understand why. While I grew up in the 90s and saw a lot of anime with disturbing content, Demon City Shinjuku, Wicked City, Akira, a lot of anime fans nowadays are younger and have seen tamer things. Part of the reason I saw those movies, after all, is because there wasn't a wealth of anime back then, not in the States. Don't get me wrong, I love those movies, and I wholeheartedly recommend them to adult fans looking for darker subject matter. But as a 15-year-old, I watched any and all anime I could find, and there were two ends of the spectrum. Pokemon on one end, and Wicked City on the other. There wasn't a lot of in between. Nowadays, that's very different, and that's good of course, but that means that a lot of fans aren't used to the edgy, violence-filled anime that I was at their age. So Goblin Slayer showing just how bad the goblins were was a bit of a shock for them, and it prompted cries of, was it really necessary? Having watched the series, I can say yes and no. It was, and it wasn't. The problem with Goblin Slayer, and I say this having very much enjoyed the show, is that it doesn't seem to know what it wants to be. On the one hand, it's a gritty fantasy with a lone protagonist who is not a hero, determined to eradicate all goblins because of trauma from his past. It is dark because the goblins are merciless and, for lack of a better word, evil. The world, fittingly, is also merciless, and many people die at the hands of these goblins, despite few taking them seriously. It's subversion. Goblins are the first enemies you encounter, they're weak and not much of a threat. But what if they were a threat? A huge one. That's the question Goblin Slayer asked. Unfortunately, that's only one part of the series, and not even an extremely large part, because Goblin Slayer is also a simple fantasy series with a party of mixed adventurers that get along well and always have each other's backs. It's a show about friendship, camaraderie, and living a good life by opening yourself up to others. Goblin Slayer is kind of like Berserk, actually, if Berserk lasted a fraction as long and had no subtlety. In the first episode, a woman is gang raped by goblins, and while her life is saved, she is psychologically damaged in such a way that she may never recover. In episode 3, a lizard man almost orgasms because of how delicious cheese is. That is the definition of uneven. Like I said, I enjoyed the show, but that's because I shut my brain off and enjoyed what was happening. It is still a problematic show, just not for the reasons people might think if they only watch the first episode, because a lot of time is spent not dealing with goblins. The titular Slayer gets allies who come to trust him and like him as a person, and that's great, but it feels unearned. It's sort of like an isekai power fantasy, except the character that represents the viewer is horribly traumatized and has almost no social skills or understanding of others because of it. No one should want to be Goblin Slayer. If the series had doubled down on the edginess and focused far less on the idea of friendship healing old wounds, it would have been more interesting. If we had seen Goblin Slayer coming close to death time after time, all while fighting only goblins in his single-minded pursuit, it probably would have been more emotionally impactful. But then again, Berserk already exists, so why try to be a copy of it? Goblin Slayer isn't perfect. It's too dark for some fans and not dark enough for others. But if you want a fantasy series that's not an isekai with lots and lots of blood, check it out. It might be your kind of thing. What are your thoughts about Goblin Slayer? Be sure to leave them in the comments, and what other fantasy anime do you like? Preferably not isekai though, there are too many of those to count. Let's try to think about fantasy anime that aren't the got sent to another world thing. Be sure to look me up on Twitter if you want to see news about upcoming videos or what gunpla I've been working on recently. I love those things. It's at ShaggyJeebus, just like the channel name. That's all for now. Thank you for watching, and remember, friends don't let friends attempt to commit genocide against a literally evil species alone. Always have your friends back.
This better not awaken anything in me.